On a fading sunset in North Carolina, the I-40 highway stretched out like a gray ribbon, cutting through fields of parched wheat and dark green pine groves. The sound of tires gliding over the pavement echoed steadily, a monotonous yet vibrant rhythm in Colonel Olivia Bennett's black SUV. At 42, Olivia was no stranger to long drives like this one from Fort Bragg to her home in Raleigh. The roughly 50-mile stretch was no challenge for someone who had commanded military operations in far-flung places like Baghdad or Kabul. But today, she wasn't in her uniform adorned with shiny badges. Instead, she opted for a navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, and neatly pressed trousers, an imprint of a woman who always kept everything under control, whether on the battlefield or in everyday life. Olivia tilted her head, glancing quickly into the rearview mirror. Her sharp brown eyes caught the flashing red and blue lights in the distance, approaching at an unusual speed. Her brows furrowed slightly, a natural reflex for someone who had faced countless unexpected situations. She wasn't speeding. The speedometer clearly read 65 miles per hour, right at the limit on I-40. The vehicle was steady, the taillights still glowing, and she was certain she hadn't done anything to draw attention. But the lights behind her grew more pronounced, accompanied by the sharp wail of a police siren slicing through the quiet of the evening. Olivia let out a long breath, her hand steady on the wheel. "All right then," she murmured to herself, her voice low and calm, like she was giving orders to a squad in the midst of chaos. She signaled, slowly eased the SUV to the shoulder, and came to a stop on the dry grass beside the road. The police car door swung open with a sharp click, and James Harper stepped out. At 38, Harper was a seasoned officer with the Raleigh Police Department, a tall man with broad shoulders and a stiff gait, as if the whole world should step aside for him. The badge on his chest gleamed in the fading sunlight, but Harper's gray-blue eyes were cold, harboring a smugness that Olivia recognized at first glance. He walked slowly across the gravel, his shiny black boots crushing the small stones beneath him, creating a menacing crunch. This wasn't the first time Olivia had faced someone like Harper, those who assumed control simply because they wore a badge and carried a gun. But she wasn't intimidated. She had stared down enemies on the battlefield, survived ambushes that no one thought she could make it through. A highway cop wasn't going to make her flinch. Harper stopped by the car window, tapping lightly twice on the glass with his knuckles, a gesture just enough to signal, but laced with an unmistakable arrogance. Olivia rolled down the window, her calm gaze meeting Harper's scrutinizing stare. He said nothing for a few seconds, simply observing her from her sun-kissed face with its strong features to the hands resting lightly yet purposefully on the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep and curt, driver's license and registration. No greeting, no explanation. Olivia tilted her head slightly, keeping her tone steady yet sharp. "Is there a problem, officer?" Harper smirked, a half-hearted smile that was anything but friendly. "I'm the one asking questions here," he replied, leaning against a window frame, bending down to get a better look inside the car. "Hand over your papers right now." Olivia didn't rush. She calmly opened her wallet, pulled out her driver's license, and then reached over to the glove compartment to grab the vehicle registration. Every movement she made was slow and deliberate, a reminder that she wasn't afraid, not in the slightest. She handed the documents through the window, her gaze locked on Harper. "Do I have the right to know why I was pulled over?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of gentle defiance that was enough to make Harper pause. He picked up the paperwork, glancing through it casually before turning back to her. "Suspicious activity," Harper said, his tone flat, as if it were a default response he'd used hundreds of times before. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious activity?" she repeated, her voice now tinged with skepticism. "I was driving in my lane at the right speed, not breaking any traffic laws. So what's suspicious here?" Harper didn't respond immediately. He smirked again, his eyes sweeping over her with undisguised disdain. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his voice firmer, as if he wanted to crush any hint of resistance. Olivia tightened her grip on the steering wheel for a moment, a wave of tension creeping into her chest. She knew the situation wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was a confrontation fueled by bias and abuse of power, but she wouldn't let her emotions take over. She had been trained to stay calm in situations far worse than this. "Can I ask why not?" she replied, her voice steady, without a hint of trembling. Harper leaned in closer, his breath seeping through the narrow gap in the window. "I said, get out of the car. Right now," he repeated, slowly, each word like a calculated threat. The atmosphere between them grew heavy, like the sky before a storm. Olivia knew that Harper was waiting for her to resist, waiting for her to lose control, waiting for anything that would give him an excuse to push things further. But Olivia Bennett was not someone easily subdued. She took a deep breath, her gaze locked firmly on Harper. "I will comply," she said, her voice calm yet carrying an unshakable strength. "But I want you to clearly explain the reason for this request." "That is my right." Harper scoffed, a dry sound escaping from his throat. "You're right," he mocked. "Here, I am the law. And when I tell you to step out, you step out." The car door opened with a soft click, and Olivia stepped down onto the dry gravel. She stood tall at 5 feet 8 inches, with broad shoulders and the steady posture of someone who had commanded hundreds of soldiers. Harper took a step back, instinctively daunted by her presence, even though he tried to mask it with a slight smirk. But Olivia knew, from this very moment, that this confrontation was not just a traffic stop, it was the beginning of a battle that Harper was unaware he had lost before it even began. The late afternoon sun slanted through the pine trees lining I-40, casting a soft golden light over Olivia Bennett's shoulders, but it wasn't enough to ease the tension that hung between her and James Harper like a tight string ready to snap. Standing on the dry grass by the roadside, Olivia held herself upright, her hands relaxed at her sides but poised to react in an instant. She was no stranger to situations like this, those scrutinizing gazes, those imposing tones, those moments when the color of her skin seemed to be the only reason she was noticed. But Harper didn't know that. To him, she was just a solitary woman of color on a desolate stretch of road, with no witnesses, no one to stand by her, a vulnerable target in a power game he had played 100 times before. Harper stepped closer, his boots crushing the gravel beneath him with each heavy step. He stood about 4 inches taller than Olivia, and the way he held himself, shoulders cocked and chest puffed out, seemed to emphasize the physical superiority he believed he possessed. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of sarcasm, as if the question was merely a pretext to prolong the standoff. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Home," she replied tersely. "I just left a ceremony at Fort Bragg." Harper raised an eyebrow, a sneer creeping onto his face. "Fort Bragg, huh?" he repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "What were you doing there?" "Visiting someone." Olivia felt a surge of heat run down her spine, but she held it back. She had heard questions like this too many times, probing inquiries laced with bias, as if a woman like her couldn't possibly belong there, couldn't be a part of the United States Army. "I am Colonel Olivia Bennett," she said, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. "With the United States Army, I just attended an event honoring veterans." A brief silence passed. Harper stared at her, his gray-blue eyes narrowing as if searching for a crack in her words. Then he let out a laugh, a hoarse, dry chuckle, devoid of humor. "Colonel," he mocked, stretching the word out as if it were a joke. "Are you sure about that?" Olivia didn't respond right away. She stood still, letting her gaze speak for her, a steadfast look, unshaken by his doubts. "Absolutely," she finally said, her voice low yet commanding, like when she ordered her soldiers in life-or-death situations. Harper shook his head, the smile on his face now twisting into a sneer. "So, where's your military ID, Colonel?" he asked, emphasizing the word colonel with blatant sarcasm. Olivia reached into her blazer pocket, but then she hesitated. A fleeting moment of confusion crossed her mind, not out of fear, but because she realized something. Her military ID wasn't here. She remembered clearly. Before the ceremony, she had changed out of her uniform and left the ID in the pocket of her dress uniform, still sitting in the locker at Fort Bragg, 50 miles away. She took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "I don't have my military ID," she said. "It's in my uniform back at the base." Harper smirked wider, as if he had just caught her in a lie. "How convenient," he replied, his tone now dripping with triumph. He picked up Olivia's driver's license, twirling it between his fingers like a toy. No signs of veteran here. A colonel like you without any proof? That's rich. Olivia clenched her fist for a moment, but quickly relaxed. She knew what he wanted: a reaction, an excuse to push things further. She wouldn't give him that excuse. "You can check my car," she said, her voice still calm. "The registration is in the glove compartment. Everything is valid." Harper smirked again, but this time his gaze darkened, as if her composure was igniting a fire within him. "Oh, I'll check," he said, his tone dropping, carrying an unspoken threat, "and not just the paperwork." He turned, striding toward Olivia's SUV, his hand already on the door handle. Olivia pivoted to follow, her voice suddenly sharper. "You don't have a legal reason to search my car." Harper stopped, turned his head to look at her over his shoulder, his gaze now as cold as ice. "Suspicious behavior is enough for me," he said, his tone slow, as if he were testing her. "And I must say you look quite tense, ma'am." The way he said ma'am wasn't respectful. It was a disguised insult, a slap in the face. Olivia felt her heart rate spike, but she didn't let it show. She had faced far more dangerous people than Harper, people who not only had badges but also machine guns and a deadly intent. He was nothing compared to them. "You're crossing the line," she said, her voice now carrying a hint of warning. Harper scoffed, turning to face her fully. "Crossing the line," he repeated, stepping closer until there were only a few feet between them. "You haven't seen anything yet." He tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, as if sizing up an opponent he was sure he could defeat. But Olivia didn't back down. She stood there, tall and unyielding, like a steel wall that Harper couldn't break through. He didn't realize that with every word he spoke, every move he made, he was only digging himself deeper into a hole he had created for himself. The air between them thickened, as if a storm was brewing on the horizon. Olivia knew this was no longer just a traffic stop. It was a battle of wills, a challenge that Harper had no idea he had chosen the wrong opponent for. And as he reached for her car door, ready to cross that final line, Olivia was prepared, not to fight back with fists, but with the weapon she always carried. The truth, her unwavering resolve, and the strength of a woman who would never be subdued. The I-40 highway now stretched out like a dark ribbon beneath the fading sunset, the last rays of light flickering to the pine trees like dying flames. A gentle breeze swept by, carrying the scent of dry grass and dusty earth, but the atmosphere between Olivia Bennett and James Harper was anything but peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, like a storm cloud hanging ominously overhead. Olivia stood a few steps away from her SUV, her hands relaxed but her gaze sharp as a knife, locking onto Harper as he placed his hand on the car door handle. He didn't pause, didn't hesitate. With a swift yank, Harper flung the door open, leaning in to peer inside like a predator searching for its prey. "You don't have a right to do that." Olivia spoke up, her voice now not just a warning but a firm declaration that echoed in the stillness of the sidewalk. Harper didn't turn around right away. He mumbled something under his breath, then began rummaging through the glove compartment, tossing aside papers and a few of Olivia's personal items as if they were worthless. A pen rolled to the floor. A small notebook was flung aside. Each of his actions was a deliberate insult. Finally, he looked up, holding an unopened bottle of water, a smirk creeping across his face. "What are you hiding in here, Colonel?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Contraband? Or maybe some military secrets no one's supposed to know?" Olivia felt a warm rush running down her spine, but she didn't let it ignite into a fire. She had been trained to control her emotions in situations far more intense than this, like those long nights in Afghanistan, when bullets whizzed overhead, and every decision was a matter of life and death. Harper wasn't worth losing her cool over. "That's my personal property," she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "You're breaking the law and you know it." Harper laughed, a dry, hollow sound echoing in the empty space. He tossed the water bottle back onto the seat, stood up straight, and turned to face her, his gray-blue eyes now flashing with a hint of danger. "Law," he repeated, stepping closer, his boots crunching on the gravel with a menacing sound. "Here, I am the law, and I say you have something to hide, so you do." He stopped about 3 feet from Olivia, tilting his head slightly as if assessing her reaction. But Olivia didn't budge. She stood there, tall and sturdy, like a steel mountain against the wind. "You have no legal reason," she replied, her voice now colder, sharper. "No warrant, no evidence, nothing but the ridiculous thoughts in your head. If you want to keep going, go ahead, but the consequences won't be what you think." Harper smirked, but this time his smile lacked the confidence it once had. There was a fleeting flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, just a small one, but Olivia noticed it immediately. She had seen that look in the eyes of soldiers fresh to battle, when they realized they had stepped into a situation beyond their control. Harper wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like her, a strong black woman standing tall and looking at him as if he were nothing more than a minor annoyance. He clenched his fist tightly, then released it, as if he were trying to suppress a surge of anger rising in his chest. "You talk a good game," he said, his voice low and menacing, stepping closer until Olivia could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "But I don't need a reason to do my job. I find you suspicious, and that's all it takes. And if you don't cooperate, things won't be easy for you." Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze now not just resolute but also a silent challenge. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice dropping, like a stone hitting the surface of a still lake, creating invisible ripples of power. Harper didn't respond right away. He stared at her, his eyes narrowing as if weighing whether to take things further. But then he made a decision, a mistake he would come to regret later. "I'm not threatening you," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm just telling you the truth. If you refuse a police officer's order, you'll face the consequences. It's that simple." He raised his hand, pointing at her chest, but not touching her, a gesture just provocative enough to test the boundaries without crossing the line. Olivia didn't back down. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart beat steadily in her chest. She knew what he wanted, a reason, a spontaneous reaction, so he could label this as defiance and drag her into a mess he thought he could win. But Olivia wasn't just anyone. She had survived ambushes, commanded battles that no one believed she could win. A cop with an oversized ego couldn't shake her. "Consequences," she repeated, her voice now laced with a hint of gentle sarcasm. "I think the one who should be worried about consequences is you, officer." The atmosphere between them felt frozen, time seemingly slowing to a crawl. Harper stood there, his hand still raised, his eyes flashing with an uncontrollable anger. He never expected her to be so tough. Never thought she would dare to confront him head-on without a hint of fear. And it was that very defiance of Olivia's that ignited a fire within Harper that he couldn't contain. He took a deep breath, then turned back to the SUV, flinging open the back door with more force than necessary. "You want to play this game?" he growled, his voice now dripping with hostility. "Fine. We'll see who gets the last laugh." Olivia watched, her eyes narrowing. She knew this battle had only just begun, and Harper, though unaware, had unwittingly set herself on a path with no way out. The darkness gradually enveloped the I-40 highway, with only the faint glow from the SUV's headlights and the flashing red and blue lights from James Harper's police car remaining. The crunch of gravel under Harper's feet echoed as he bent down to rummage through the back seat of Olivia Bennett's car, his hands roughly tossing aside everything: a light jacket, a personal bag, even a box of cookies she had brought back from the ceremony at Fort Bragg. Each item was flung aside like a declaration. He wasn't just searching. He wanted to destroy, to assert his power over her. Olivia stood a few steps away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze now not just resolute but sharp as ice, like a leopard watching its prey dig its own grave. "You won't find anything," Olivia said, her voice cutting through the stillness, calm yet laced with a hint of mockery. Harper paused, his hand still gripping a small fabric bag, turning his head to glance at her over his shoulder. His eyes flashed with suppressed anger, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he tossed the bag onto the floor of the vehicle, stood up straight and stepped closer to her, his boots thudding heavily against the ground as if trying to crush everything beneath them. "You think you're clever, huh?" he growled, his voice now trembling with rage. "You think those words are going to make me stop? I've been doing this for over a decade, and no one has ever dared to stand here and challenge me like you." Olivia stood still. She stared directly into Harper's eyes, her gaze piercing through him, revealing the arrogance that masked a deep-seated insecurity. "I'm not challenging you," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet still heavy with meaning. "I'm just stating the truth. You're crossing the line and you're going to pay for it." Harper laughed, but his laughter was no longer confident. It was offbeat, dry, like someone trying to maintain a strong facade while cracks were starting to show inside. "Pay for it?" he repeated, stepping closer until there were only 2 feet between them. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Here, I make all the decisions. And you, colonel or not, can't change a thing." Olivia took a deep breath, feeling her heartbeat steady in her chest. She knew this was the climax of their confrontation, the moment when Harper thought he had victory in his grasp. But in reality, he had just backed himself into a corner. "All right then," she said, her voice now soft yet laced with irresistible strength. "Go ahead, but don't say I didn't warn you." Harper smirked one last time, turning back to his SUV, ready to continue his pointless search. But Olivia knew, deep down, that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. This battle wasn't over. It had only just begun, and she was ready to make Harper understand that true power didn't come from the badge on his chest. Night fell on the I-40 highway, darkness enveloping the rows of pines lining both sides of the road, leaving only the flickering lights from James Harper's police car and the headlights of Olivia Bennett's sleek black SUV. A cold wind swept through, carrying the crisp bite of North Carolina's autumn, but the air between the two figures standing on the roadside was charged, like a smoldering furnace ready to ignite. Olivia stood about 10 feet away from her car, arms crossed over her chest, her stance straight and unyielding like an old oak in the midst of a storm. She watched Harper legally rummage through her vehicle, papers scattered and personal belongings tossed about, yet she remained unfazed. This wasn't the first time she had faced injustice, and it certainly wouldn't be the first time she stood her ground against someone like Harper. James Harper stood tall after rummaging to the back seat of Olivia's car, his hands planted on his hips, breath puffing out in white clouds in the chilly air. He turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes glinting with a false sense of triumph. "See," he said, his tone dry yet taunting. "Nothing to hide, but I'm not done yet. Step across the street right now." Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp as a knife, slicing through Harper's smugness. "I complied with your request when I pulled over," she replied, her voice steady and measured, like a commander issuing orders in a war room. "But you have no legal grounds to demand that I exit the vehicle or search it. I want to know why you're doing this." Harper smirked, his smile now no longer one of sarcasm, but a blatant display of contempt. "You want to know why?" he repeated, stepping closer, his shiny black boots crunching on the gravel with a menacing sound. "Because I said so, and that's enough. I don't owe you any explanations." He stopped about 5 feet away from Olivia, leaning slightly forward, as if to use his height to intimidate her. But Olivia didn't back down. Standing at 5 feet 8 inches, she wasn't small, and her broad shoulders and straight posture radiated a strength that Harper couldn't deny, no matter how hard he tried. "I have the right to know," Olivia said, her voice now carrying a hint of cold steel, yet perfectly controlled. "The law doesn't give you the right to do whatever you want. You need a valid reason for any violation, a specific threat. What are you besides the thought that I'm someone you can bully?" Harper laughed, a rough chuckle echoing in the quiet space, but it couldn't mask a flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a woman of color standing before him with a confidence he couldn't shake. "You're quite the talker," Harper said with tight voice, his hand clenching into a fist before relaxing, as if he were trying to hold back a rising tide of anger. "But I'm not here to argue with you. I told you to step across the street. So do it. If not, things are going to get messy." Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. She knew what he was doing, pushing her into a corner, trying to provoke her, so he could use that as an excuse for worse actions. But Olivia wasn't someone who fell for traps easily. She had survived ambushes in Iraq, faced enemies far more dangerous than Harper could ever be. A cop with a badge and a swollen ego wasn't going to intimidate her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice now firm, like a stone dropping into a lake, sending out invisible ripples. "Unless you give me a legitimate reason." You don't have the right to order me around just because you want to. This isn't your playground, officer. Harper stood still for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he weighed whether to push things further. He didn't expect her to be so resolute, no shouting, no trembling, not a hint of fear he usually saw in others in situations like this. Are you refusing my orders? Harper asked, his voice dropping low, carrying a clear threat. He stepped closer, leaving only 3 feet between them, his breath puffing out in white clouds in the cold air. Olivia didn't flinch. She stared straight into his eyes, her gaze not just resolute, but also a silent warning. I refuse an illegal request, she replied, her voice now sharp as a knife. What do you want to arrest me for? Driving legally? Or because I won't bow down to you like you expect? Harper clenched his fist tightly, this time not letting go right away. He stood there, his breath heavy, like a cornered beast still trying to growl to maintain an air of strength. You're making things worse for yourself, he said, his voice trembling with anger. I gave you a chance to make everything easier, but you just wouldn't listen. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze now carrying a hint of subtle sarcasm. Easier for who? She asked. For you or for me? The air between them thickened, as if time was slowing down before an inevitable explosion. Harper wasn't used to being challenged head-on like this, and Olivia's unwavering determination, her icy calm, was igniting a fire he couldn't control. He took a deep breath, then turned away, striding toward his police car, his hand already resting on the radio clipped to his hip. You want to play this game? He growled, his voice now brimming with hostility. Fine. Let's see how long you can hold out. Olivia stood still, her gaze fixed on Harper as he began to say something into the radio. She knew he was calling for backup, trying to turn this situation into something bigger to crush her, but she wasn't afraid. She was ready not to fight with her fists, but with the weapon she always carried, the truth, resilience, and unyielding will. The night wind howled stronger along the I-40 highway, swirling dry leaves that crunched beneath Olivia Bennett's feet. The red and blue lights from James Harper's police car flashed incessantly, casting flickering shadows across her face, but her eyes remained bright and unyielding, like a flame that would never go out. Harper stood about 15 feet away, holding the radio clipped to his hip, his voice booming through the speaker with deliberate smugness. Dispatch! This is Unit 27. I need backup on I-40, mile marker 295. We have a non-compliant individual, suspected of resisting arrest. He emphasized the word resisting, as if it were the ace up his sleeve to trap Olivia in a snare he believed she couldn't escape. Olivia stood still, her arms crossed over her chest, her steady breath releasing into the frigid air as wisps of white smoke. She could hear every word Harper was saying into the radio, and she knew he was twisting the situation, turning her from an innocent driver into a threat to justify his actions. But she wouldn't let that shake her. She had faced bigger enemies than Harper, those wielding rifles and homemade bombs in far-off lands where the law was just a vague concept. A highway patrolman in North Carolina wasn't enough to scare her, even if he called in the SWAT team. Harper pulled his hand away from the radio and turned to Olivia with a smug smile that radiated triumph. You heard that, he said, stepping closer, his boots crunching on the gravel with a sound like a predator stalking its prey. Help is on the way. Do you want to change your attitude, or do you want things to get even worse? Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze locked onto him without a hint of wavering. My attitude isn't the issue, she replied, her voice low and sharp like a blade slicing through the air. The problem is you're acting outside your authority. Calling for backup doesn't change the fact that you have no legal grounds to do this. Harper stopped about 5 feet away from her, his gray-blue eyes narrowing as if he were searching for a crack in her argument. But he found nothing. Olivia's calmness, the icy control she maintained, left him flustered, even though he tried to hide it with another smirk. You think you know the law better than I do? He spat, hands on his hips, his thumb hooked into his belt near his gun. I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what I can and can't do. And right now, I have every reason to doubt you. Olivia raised an eyebrow, a small gesture, but enough to convey her skepticism. Every reason, she repeated, her voice now laced with a hint of subtle sarcasm. So tell me, Officer, what's your reason? Am I speeding? Driving in the wrong lane? Or do you just not like the way I'm looking at you? Harper clenched his fist, his breathing heavier, like a cornered beast. He wasn't used to being confronted like this, and every word Olivia said felt like a dagger piercing his inflated ego. You're digging your own grave, Harper said, his voice now trembling with anger. He stepped closer, leaving just 3 feet between them, leaning in slightly to tower over her with his height. I don't need to explain anything to you. I tell you what to do, and you do it. If not, you'll be handcuffed and sitting in my car before you even know what's happening. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling her heartbeat steady in her chest. She knew he was trying to provoke her into a rash reaction, a shout, an angry gesture, anything he could label as defiance to justify his next move. But she wasn't going to give him that opportunity. I'm not opposing you, she said, her voice now colder, like a winter wind sweeping through the pines. I'm just asking you to follow the law, which is what you're being paid to do. If you want to handcuff me, go ahead, but you'll have to explain to your superiors why you're arresting someone who hasn't done anything wrong, just because you don't like their attitude. Harper stood still for a moment, his eyes flashing with a barely contained anger. He didn't expect her to be this tough, no trembling, no pleading, no signs of fear that he usually saw in others. Do you think you're special? Harper growled, his voice now dripping with hostility. He raised his hand, pointing at her chest but not touching it, a gesture just enough to provoke. You think you can stand here, spouting your lofty words, and just walk away? I've seen dozens of people like you who think they're important, but in the end, they all have to bow their heads. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze now not just resolute but also a silent challenge. Dozens of people like me, she repeated, her voice carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. So tell me, officer, are those people the ones you bullied just because you could? Or are they the ones who dared to stand up when you cross a line? Harper took a deep breath, his exhale forming a thick cloud of white smoke in the cold air. He didn't respond right away, but Olivia could see the fire in his eyes flaring up, not from confidence, but from a creeping sense of helplessness invading his mind. He couldn't control her, and that drove him mad. You're testing my patience, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet laced with menace. And I don't like that. Olivia smiled faintly, a smile that wasn't mocking but rather a statement of truth. I'm not here to make you happy, she replied. I'm here to make sure you do your job right. And right now you're failing miserably. Harper stood frozen, his hands trembling with anger. He knew she was cornering him, and there was no way out. The tension between them was now like a taut string pulled to its limit, just waiting for a tug to snap in two. The night on I-40 is pitch black now, with only the headlights of the SUV and the flashing red and blue lights from Officer James Harper's patrol car cutting through the darkness. The wind howls through the pines, sounding like the whispers of an approaching storm. But between Olivia Bennett and Harper, the tension is even thicker than the brewing tempest. Olivia stands firm on the shoulder of the road, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes shining bright like the headlights, locked onto Harper without blinking. Harper, less than 3 feet away from her, breathes heavily, his breath puffing out in thick white clouds in the 40-degree chill of North Carolina. He just spat out a threat, but Olivia doesn't flinch. She stands there, unyielding like a wall of steel, and it's that very resolve that's causing Harper to lose his grip. Do you think you can get away with this? Harper growled, his voice now laced with anger and frustration instead of smugness. He raised his hand, his finger pointing directly at Olivia's chest, but he kept a small distance, unwilling to touch her. Help is on the way, and when they get here, you won't have a chance to say those smart remarks anymore. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving him, as if she were looking right through his tough exterior to see the confusion within. Help? She echoed, her voice low and sharp like a cold blade. What do you think they're going to do? Handcuff me for asking you to follow the law? Or will they just stand here and watch you try to explain why you searched my car without any reason? Harper clenched his fist tightly, the knuckles turning white under the flickering lights. He didn't answer right away, but Olivia could see the fire in his eyes igniting, not out of confidence, but because he realized he was losing the upper hand. You're defying me, he said, his voice trembling with anger. "That's reason enough to arrest you. You're resisting a police officer's orders, and I have the right to do whatever it takes to ensure safety." Olivia raised an eyebrow, a small gesture, but loaded with meaning. "Safety?" she asked, her tone now laced with a hint of gentle sarcasm. "Who am I a threat to? You or your ego?" Harper stepped closer, now only 2 feet between them, his breath so heavy that Olivia could smell the stale coffee and cigarettes on his shirt. "Don't play smart with me," he growled, his hands trembling as if he wanted to do something but didn't dare. "I gave you a chance to make this easy, but you chose the hard way. Now, face the consequences." Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs, soothing the heat simmering in her chest. She knew he was trying to corner her, wanting her to lose her cool, wanting her to fight back so he'd have a reason to act. But she wouldn't give him that excuse. "I didn't choose either path," she said, her voice now colder, like a winter wind blowing through. "You're the one who chose to cross the line, to turn a routine traffic stop into a personal confrontation. I'm just standing here, asking you to do your job. If you think that's defiance, then the problem isn't with me. It's with you." Harper stood still for a moment, his eyes flashing with a barely contained anger. He hadn't expected her to be this tough. No shouting, no trembling, not a hint of fear that he usually relied on to intimidate others. "You don't understand," Harper said, his voice now low, almost a whisper but dripping with menace. "Here, I am the law. And when I say you're guilty, you're guilty. No one cares about your excuses." Olivia offered a faint smile, one that wasn't mocking but rather affirming. "The law," she echoed, her tone carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "The law isn't something you can twist to your will. It's meant to protect the innocent from people like you. And I am not guilty, you know that, and I know that." Harper took a deep breath, exhaling a thick cloud of white smoke. He turned around and walked toward his police car, his hand resting on the radio. "Dispatch," he said into the speaker, his voice now trembling with anger. "Update on the suspect. Completely uncooperative. I need the K-9 unit to check the vehicle. I suspect there are illegal substances." He emphasized the words "illegal substances," as if it were a final card to crush Olivia. But Olivia didn't flinch. She stood there, her gaze fixed on Harper, her arms still crossed over her chest. She knew he was exaggerating, trying to paint her as a criminal to justify his actions, but she wasn't afraid. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness, calm yet laced with a hint of warning. Harper turned around, his eyes now blazing with anger. "A mistake?" he growled, stepping closer to her again. "You're the one making a mistake by daring to speak to me like that. When the K-9 unit gets here, you won't have anything left to say." Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze locked onto him. "All right," she replied, her tone now soft but carrying an undeniable strength. "But when they arrive, you'll have to explain why you did all of this without any evidence, without any reason. And I'll be right here, waiting to see how you plan to wriggle out of the mess you created." Harper stood still, his hands trembling with anger. He knew she was right, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. The tension between them was like a guitar string pulled to its breaking point, and Olivia understood that the moment it snapped would be when Harper realized he had lost not because she resisted, but because she would never back down. The darkness on the I-40 highway was now thick, enveloping everything in a pitch-black shroud, with only the flickering red and blue lights from James Harper's police car and the faint glow from the headlights of Olivia Bennett's SUV piercing through. The wind that had howled through the pine trees had quieted down, giving way to the heavy silence between the two figures standing on the roadside. Olivia stood firm, her arms crossed over her chest, her stance as solid as an unmovable mountain. She had just delivered her final warning to Harper that he would face the consequences of his reckless actions, and now she waited not with fear, but with the certainty of someone who knows they stand on the foundation of truth. Harper stood about 5 feet away from her, his grip still tight on the radio, his breathing now slow but heavy, like a beast that had just run its heart out and was trying to catch its breath. His gray-blue eyes flashed with anger, but beneath that, Olivia could see an unsettling anxiety, creeping an anxiety of someone who realizes they've gone too far but can't admit it. "You think you've won?" Harper spat, but his voice wasn't as strong as before. It was offbeat, trembling, as if he was trying to maintain a facade of confidence while inside he was starting to crack. When the K-9 unit gets here, you won't have anything left to say. I'll find something, and you'll pay the price. Olivia tilted her head slightly. Her gaze locked onto him, unwavering. Found something? She repeated, her voice low and steady, like a commander assessing the situation on the battlefield. You think you can make up evidence to pin something on me? Do you really believe the K-9 unit will help you escape the mess you created for yourself? Harper clenched his fist tightly, but he didn't respond right away. He turned away, striding toward his police car, as if he wanted to avoid Olivia's gaze, one that was not only resolute but seemed to pierce through his tough exterior. Just wait and see, he said, his voice now lowered, carrying a faint hint of threat. He reached into the car, pulled out a pen and a notebook, and began jotting down something, probably a preliminary report to prepare for the support team that was on its way. Olivia stood still, watching his every move. She knew he was trying to buy time, trying to maintain the upper hand by pretending to be busy. But she also knew that with each passing minute, Harper was digging himself deeper into the hole he had created. You can write whatever you want, she said, her voice cutting through the silence, calm yet laced with a touch of gentle sarcasm. But the truth doesn't change. You have nothing but your words, and that won't be enough. Harper put down his pen and turned to look at her, his eyes now bloodshot with anger and exhaustion. You don't understand, he growled, stepping closer to her again, his boots crunching on the gravel with a menacing sound. I don't need proof to do my job. If I say you're suspicious, then you're suspicious. And when the K-9 unit arrives, they'll be on my side, not yours. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs, soothing the simmering heat in her chest. She offered a faint smile, not one of mockery, but quiet affirmation from someone who knew she held the winning hand. Stand by your side? She asked, her voice now soft yet carrying an undeniable strength. They will stand by the truth. And the truth is that you stopped me without reason, searched my car without a warrant, and now you're calling the K-9 unit without any evidence. Do you really think they'll blindly follow your lead, or will they question you when they see you have nothing to show for it? Harper stood frozen, his hands trembling with anger. He knew she was right, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He turned away, walking back toward the police car, his hand resting on the door as if trying to escape Olivia's gaze. Just wait, he said, his voice now completely lost, devoid of any threat. You'll see just how right I am when it's all over. Olivia didn't respond right away. She stood there, her gaze following Harper as he got into the car, shutting the door with a sharp click. She knew he was trying to regain his composure, desperately clinging to the belief that he still had control over the situation. But she also knew that belief was an illusion. Harper had lost the moment he decided to confront her, not because she was physically stronger, but because she was stronger in will, in truth, in the unwavering resolve that he could never comprehend. Olivia took a deep breath, let her arms drop to her sides, her gaze no longer fixed on Harper, but instead focused on the long stretch of highway ahead. She could hear the distant roar of engines, likely the support team Harper had called, approaching from mile marker 295. But she wasn't worried. She had stood strong through challenges far greater than this, far more than the countless long nights in Kabul, when the sound of bombs echoed in the sky, and she had to keep her squad alive. A cop with a badge and an inflated ego wasn't going to make her falter, no matter how many people he called in. She stood there, tall and unyielding, like a mountain against the cold wind. Harper might think he had the upper hand, but Olivia knew the truth. He had put himself in a battle he couldn't win. And when the K-9 unit arrived, when the light of truth shone down on everything, Harper would have to face the consequences of his arrogance. Olivia didn't need to do anything more. She just had to stand here, steadfast as she always was, and let Harper destroy himself. The night on the I-40 highway was eerily quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. The red and blue lights flashing from James Harper's police car still illuminated the shoulder, but that light now seemed feeble, gradually swallowed by the thick darkness of North Carolina. Olivia Bennett stood about 10 feet away from her SUV, her hands relaxed at her sides, her eyes shining bright in the night not out of anger, but from an unshakable determination. Harper had just called for the K-9 unit, his voice crackling over the radio with a false sense of confidence, as if he believed that with more people and more dogs, he could overpower her. But Olivia knew better than anyone. He didn't have the upper hand, and she was about to prove it. Harper sat in the police car, the door wide open, his hand gripping the radio like a talisman. He looked at Olivia through the windshield, his gray-blue eyes now clouded with anger and exhaustion. He had just finished a preliminary report, a pile of paperwork he thought would protect him when backup arrived. But Olivia could see the unease in every movement he made. He was no longer the confident predator he had been at the start. Now, he resembled a wounded animal, growling to maintain a facade of strength while inside he was crumbling. "You just stay there," Harper called out, his voice faltering, stripped of any threat. "When the K-9 unit gets here, you won't have anything left to say." Olivia didn't respond right away. She took a deep breath, feeling the 40-degree chill of the autumn night fill her lungs, soothing the simmering heat in her chest. She knew Harper was waiting for her to push back, waiting for her to lose her cool, waiting for anything that would give him the upper hand again. But she wasn't going to give him that chance. Instead, she quietly slipped her hand into the pocket of her blazer, her fingers brushing against the smartphone she always carried, not to call for help in a panic, but to use it as a weapon that Harper would never see coming. She kept her gaze locked on him, a faint smile flickering across her lips, not one of mockery, but the confidence of someone who knows they hold the key to changing the game. Harper smirked when he saw her standing still, thinking it was a sign of surrender. "Out of words, are we?" he mocked, stepping out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel with a menacing sound. He placed his hands on his hips, leaning forward as if he wanted to overpower her once again. "I told you, here I am the law. You can say whatever you want, but when my team arrives, you'll have to bow your head." Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze now not just resolute but also a silent challenge. "Bow my head?" she repeated, her voice low and sharp like a blade slicing through the air. "I don't bow to anyone, especially not to someone abusing their power like you." Harper let out a laugh, a raspy sound echoing in the stillness, but it couldn't hide the flicker of tension in his eyes. "Abuse of power?" he growled, stepping closer, leaving just 5 feet between them. "Who do you think you are to say that to me? A woman driving alone on I-40, no military ID, nothing to back up your bragging. I have every right to do this." Olivia took a deep breath, feeling her heartbeat steady in her chest. She knew he was trying to drag her into a pointless argument, but she wouldn't take the bait. Instead, she pulled her phone from her pocket, her finger gliding smoothly over the screen with the calmness of someone who had planned every move. "You might think that," she said, her voice now soft yet carrying an undeniable strength. "But I don't need any papers on me to prove who I am. I have something better." Harper raised an eyebrow, a flicker of confusion crossing his face as he saw her holding her phone. "What are you planning to do with that?" he asked, his tone now laced with suspicion. "Call a lawyer? Or maybe summon some friends to come and cry for you?" Olivia didn't respond. She quietly dialed a save number, then held the phone to her ear, her gaze never leaving Harper. The phone rang twice before the other end picked up. Army Command, Major General Grayson's office. A professional voice came through the speaker. Harper stood still, his eyes narrowing as he tried to grasp what was happening. Olivia kept her tone calm and sharp, just like when she reported in high-level meetings at Fort Bragg. "This is Colonel Olivia Bennett," she said, her voice ringing clear in the silence. "I need to speak with Major General Grayson right now. This is an emergency." Harper smirked, but his smile was no longer confident. It wavered, as if he just realized he was standing on thin ice about to crack. "Are you kidding me?" Harper growled, stepping closer, leaving just 3 feet between them. "Do you really think a phone call is going to change anything? I don't care who you call here. I'm the one in charge." Olivia didn't respond right away. She waited, her gaze locked onto him, and then a deep voice came to the phone. "Colonel Bennett, is that you? What's going on?" It was Major General Grayson, a man Olivia had worked with for over a decade, someone whose authority even Harper couldn't deny upon hearing that name. Olivia smiled faintly, not out of triumph, but because she knew the tide had just turned. "General," she said, her voice now carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "I'm being harassed by a police officer in Raleigh on I-40. He searched my car without a warrant, threatened to arrest me without cause, and now he's calling the K-9 unit to look for non-existent evidence. I need immediate intervention." Harper stood frozen, his hands trembling with anger and confusion. He didn't realize that this phone call was not just a call, it was a lethal blow, and he was about to feel its full impact. The night on I-40 now felt like a stage, with the flashing red and blue lights from Officer James Harper's patrol car setting the scene for a confrontation that was escalating quickly. The cold wind blew through, carrying the crispness of a North Carolina autumn, but the atmosphere between Olivia Bennett and Harper was heated, like a smoldering fire ready to ignite. Olivia stood about 10 feet away from her SUV, phone pressed to her ear, her voice ringing out clear and sharp in the darkness. "I'm being harassed by a police officer in Raleigh on I-40. He's searching my car without a warrant, threatening to arrest me without cause, and now he's calling an AK-9 unit to find non-existent evidence. I need immediate intervention." Her words were not just a plea. They were a command, delivered with the confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge in the most intense situations. Harper stood less than 3 feet away from her, his gray-blue eyes wide for a moment, as if he had just been dealt an invisible blow. He could hear every word Olivia was saying on the phone, and even though he tried to maintain a tough exterior, his hand trembled as it released the police car door. "What the hell are you doing?" he growled, his voice completely losing the smugness it had at the start. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel, as if he wanted to drown out her words with his presence. "You think a phone call is going to save you? I don't care who you're calling here. I'm the one in charge." Olivia didn't move. She held the phone close to her ear, her gaze locked onto Harper, unwavering. The voice of Major General Grayson came through the line, deep and authoritative. "Colonel Bennett, I need you to tell me exactly what's happening. What is that officer's name?" Harper smirked, but his smile was now twisted, like someone trying to maintain composure, as the ground beneath them began to shake. Olivia took a deep breath, her voice steady yet carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "His name is James Harper, with the Raleigh Police Department. He stopped me without legal cause, searched my car without a warrant, and now he's trying to fabricate charges to justify his actions." Harper jumped, his eyes flashing with a hint of panic. "What did you just say?" he shouted, his voice now high-pitched with anger and fear. He lunged forward, just a foot away from her, his hand raised as if to snatch the phone from Olivia's grasp. But she didn't back down. She leaned slightly to the side, just enough to evade his hand, her gaze as cold as ice, like a commander assessing an out-of-control enemy on the battlefield. "You should stop," she said, her tone low and sharp, slicing through Harper's growls. "You're only making things worse for yourself." On the other end of the phone, Major General Grayson's voice came through, now laced with simmering anger. "James Harper, huh? Where exactly are you, Colonel? I'll handle this right away." Olivia kept her tone steady, just like when she reported during high-level meetings at Fort Bragg. "I'm at mile marker 295 on I-40, heading toward Raleigh. He just called in the K-9 unit, claiming he suspects I have illegal goods, but I'm not breaking any laws. This is clearly harassment, sir." Harper stood frozen, his breath heavy, like a cornered beast. He heard every word she said, and for the first time, he felt a chill run down his spine, not from a 40-degree F autumn night, but because he realized he had just poked a hornet's nest he couldn't handle. "You're making this up!" Harper shouted, his voice now trembling with panic. He turned and rushed toward the police car, reaching for the radio as if he wanted to cut the situation short. "Dispatch, this is Unit 27. Cancel the K-9 request. The situation is under control." But his voice faltered, and Olivia knew he was trying to salvage what was left of his dignity. She smiled faintly, not out of triumph, but because she could clearly see the collapse approaching. "It's too late," she said, her voice ringing out in the stillness, calm yet laced with a hint of warning. "You've gone too far, and now there's no turning back." The voice of Major General Grayson rang out again, sharp as a sword. "Colonel, you keep the line open, I'm contacting the Raleigh Police Department right now. I'll have them call straight to his commander. No one is allowed to harass a senior officer of the United States Army like this. Harper turned around, his eyes now bloodshot with anger and fear. He could clearly hear the general's words over the phone, and for the first time, he didn't know what to say. He stood there, gripping the radio tightly, his breath coming out in thick white puffs in the cold air. You can't do this, he stammered, his voice now stripped of any authority. You don't have the right. Olivia lowered her phone slightly, but kept the connection with General Grayson. She looked straight into Harper's eyes, her gaze not only firm but also a silent declaration. She had the right, and he couldn't stop her. I don't need your authority, she said, her voice dropping, like a stone falling into a still pond, creating invisible ripples. I have the truth, and I have people who will stand up for it. You've picked the wrong person to confront, Officer Harper. Harper clenched his fist tightly, the knuckles turning white under the flickering lights. He wanted to scream, to charge forward, to do anything to regain the upper hand, but he knew he couldn't. The distant sound of an engine approached, perhaps the K-9 unit he had just called off, or another vehicle, but it didn't matter anymore. Olivia's phone call had changed everything. He felt the ground beneath him tremble, and for the first time in 15 years as a cop, James Harper realized he was no longer in control of the situation. Olivia stood there, tall and unyielding, like a mountain against the cold wind, and she knew that this battle had tilted in her favor not through fists, but through the power of truth. When Olivia picks up the phone and sends Harper into a panic, can you feel the power of the truth erupting? Just one call, and she turned everything around. Comment, truth wins below to support Olivia. Your words will be the strength that fuels her righteous journey as we spread the message together. The night on the I-40 highway now felt like a silent battlefield, where the flashing red and blue lights from James Harper's police car became the only sign of the chaos unfolding. The cold wind howled through the pine trees, carrying the crisp bite of North Carolina's autumn, but the tension between Olivia Bennett and Harper was fiery, like a blaze that had just reached its peak. Olivia stood about 10 feet away from her SUV, phone still in hand, her gaze locked on Harper with an unwavering determination. She had just requested Major General Grayson to intervene, and now she sensed a shift in the atmosphere not from the wind or the darkness, but from the growing panic etched on Harper's face. Harper stood less than 3 feet away from her, his gray-blue eyes wide with confusion, his breath forming thick white clouds in a 40-degree chill. He had just heard Major General Grayson's voice through Olivia's phone, and for the first time during this confrontation, he felt the ground beneath him truly shake. You can't do this, he shouted, his voice now high-pitched with panic, stripped of any authority a seasoned police officer might have had. He lunged forward, hand raised as if to snatch the phone from Olivia's grasp, but she leaned slightly to the side, just enough to evade him, her gaze as cold as ice, like a commander watching her enemy crumble. Stop right there, Olivia said, her voice low and sharp, slicing through Harper's growls like a knife through the air. You've gone too far, and there's no turning back now. Harper stood still for a moment, his hands trembling with anger and fear. He wanted to fight back, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything to regain the upper hand. But Major General Grayson's voice came to the phone again, cutting and unyielding. Colonel Bennett, I've contacted the Raleigh Police Department. I just spoke with Chief Mitchell. They're sending a senior officer over immediately to handle this. Just hold your ground. Harper won't get away. Harper jolted, his eyes widening as if he had just been punched in the face. Chief Mitchell, he mumbled, his voice now shaky, like a man clinging to a last shred of hope. He turned and sprinted toward the police car, desperately reaching for the radio. Dispatch! This is Unit 27, he shouted into the mic, his voice trembling. Cancel all requests for backup. I don't need anyone here anymore. The situation is under control. But the voice on the other end came through, cold and professional. Unit 27, your request has been noted, but we just received orders from Chief Mitchell. A senior officer is en route to mile marker 295. You are instructed to hold your position and await further instructions. Harper let go of the radio, and it fell onto the chair with a sharp clunk. He turned to look at Olivia, his eyes now bloodshot with anger and fear. "What have you done?" he growled, stepping closer to her again, but his steps were unsteady, like a drunk man losing his way. "Do you think you can call someone from up high to crush me? I won't let you win." Olivia lowered her phone slightly, but kept the connection with General Grayson. She looked straight into Harper's eyes, her gaze not only firm but also a silent declaration. He had lost, and he knew it. "I'm not crushing you," she said, her voice dropping, like a stone falling into a still lake, creating invisible ripples. "You're crushing yourself by choosing to act this way. I'm just doing what's necessary to protect my rights, and to make sure you don't do this to anyone else." Harper clenched her fist tightly, the knuckles of his hand turning pale under the flickering lights. He wanted to scream, wanted to charge at her, but he knew he had no options left. The distant sound of an engine roared, not the K-9 unit he had canceled the request for, but another police car, its headlights blazing as it approached from the direction of Raleigh. "Who do you think you are?" Harper growled, his voice now trembling with desperation. "You think you can call the Pentagon and make me lose everything? I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what I'm doing." Olivia smiled faintly, not out of triumph, but because she could clearly see his downfall. 15 years, she repeated, her voice carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "And in those 15 years, you've grown accustomed to abusing your power without anyone daring to question you. But today, you've met the wrong person. I'm not just a driver. I'm Colonel Olivia Bennett, United States Army, and I won't let anyone trample on my rights, especially not you." Harper stood still, his breath heavy, like a wounded beast with no strength left to fight back. The sound of the engine grew closer, and the headlights from the second police car illuminated the sidewalk, highlighting Harper's pale face. He turned his head to look, his eyes wide with panic, as he saw a senior officer, a tall man with a lieutenant's badge on his chest, step out of the car, his serious gaze fixed directly on him. "Officer Harper." The lieutenant's voice rang out, deep and authoritative. "Captain Mitchell wants to speak with you. Right now." Harper turned back to look at Olivia, his eyes now filled not with anger but with despair. He knew he had lost, not because of the K-9 unit, not because of the radio, but because Olivia's phone call had brought the whole system crashing down around him. Olivia stood there, tall and unyielding, like a mountain against the cold wind. She didn't need to say anything more. The truth had spoken, and Harper couldn't escape it. The footsteps of the lieutenant drew closer, and for the first time that night, Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her chest, not because of victory, but because she knew justice was coming, and was arriving faster than Harper could imagine. The night on the I-40 highway now blazed bright under the headlights of the second police car, slicing through the thick darkness of North Carolina like a blade of light. The engine had just shut off, and a lieutenant from the Raleigh Police Department stepped out, his shiny black boots hitting the gravel with a solid, authoritative sound. Olivia Bennett stood about 10 feet away from her SUV, still holding her phone, her gaze fixed on the scene before her with the icy calm of a commander who had triumphed without firing a single shot. James Harper stood a few steps away from her, his bloodshot eyes now clouded with panic, his breath coming out in white puffs in the 40-degree chill, like a man who had run for his life yet still couldn't escape his fate. The lieutenant, a tall man in his 50s with a shiny badge gleaming on his chest, approached Harper, his gaze sharp as a razor, cutting to the tough exterior Harper tried to maintain. "Officer Harper," the lieutenant spoke, his voice deep and unforgiving. "Captain Mitchell just called me. You're required to explain what's going on here, and I suggest you start right now." Harper flinched, his hands trembling as he turned to face the lieutenant. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a choked sound, as if his inflated ego had just been punctured and was deflating by the second. Olivia stood still, her gaze shifting from Harper to the lieutenant, then back to Harper. She didn't need to say anything more. The call to General Grayson had done it all, and now the system Harper had once relied on to abuse his power was turning against him. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs, soothing the simmering heat in her chest after the long confrontation. "I tried to warn you," she said, her voice steady and low, like a commander wrapping up a training session, "but you wouldn't listen." Harper turned back to her, his eyes now filled not with anger but with desperation. What "What have you done to me?" he stammered, his voice now lost, like a man pleading for mercy he never thought he needed. The lieutenant raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting to Olivia with a hint of curiosity. "Colonel Bennett, I assume?" the lieutenant asked, his tone now carrying a touch of respect. Olivia nodded slightly, her eyes never leaving Harper. "That's right," she replied, her voice ringing clear in the stillness. "I am Colonel Olivia Bennett, United States Army. Officer Harper stopped me without legal cause, searched my vehicle without a warrant, and threatened to arrest me without evidence. I have contacted Army Command, and they have requested the Raleigh Police Department to handle this matter." The lieutenant nodded, his gaze shifting to Harper with clear disappointment. "I understand," he said, his voice dropping like a verdict. He turned back to Harper, hands on his hips. "Do you have anything to say, Harper? Because from what I see, you're in a whole lot of trouble." Harper took a deep breath, tried to regain his composure, but his voice still trembled as he spoke. "Lieutenant, she's refusing to cooperate," he said, pointing at Olivia. "I suspect she's acting suspiciously, no military ID. Nothing to prove who she is. I'm just doing my job." Olivia smiled faintly, not out of triumph, but because she could see the desperation in Harper's eyes. "You're doing your job?" she repeated, her tone laced with a hint of gentle sarcasm. "You searched my car without a warrant, called in the K-9 unit without any evidence, and tried to fabricate a charge to justify your actions. That's not what an officer does. That's an abuse of power." The lieutenant frowned, his gaze locking onto Harper. "Is that true, Harper?" he asked, his voice now colder, like a final warning. Harper opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned to look at Olivia, his eyes now clouded with fear. He knew there was no turning back. The lieutenant was not someone easily fooled, and Olivia's phone call had put him in the crosshairs of both the Raleigh Police Department and the Pentagon. I just, he stammered, but the lieutenant raised his hand, cutting him off. "Enough," he said, his voice resonating like a low growl. "You step over to the other side of my car. Right now, we'll talk to Chief Mitchell when we get to the station. And you, Colonel Bennett," he turned to Olivia, his tone softer, "I apologize for this. I'll make sure it's handled properly." Olivia nodded, her gaze now no longer focused on Harper, but directed at the highway stretching out ahead. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said, her voice low and steady. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The lieutenant nodded again, then signaled to Harper. "Let's go," he said, his tone unforgiving. Harper stumbled toward the lieutenant's car, his hands trembling as he opened the door. He glanced at Olivia one last time, his expression no longer one of anger, but complete defeat, a once invincible man, now turned away by the very system he relied on. Olivia stood still, watching as Harper settled into the back seat of the lieutenant's police car, the door shutting with a sharp click. She took a deep breath, relaxed her shoulders, and felt the chill of the autumn night seep through her blazer. The call to Major General Grayson not only saved her from Harper's harassment, it sent a clear message. The truth always prevails over abuse of power, and she wouldn't let anyone trample on that. The engine of the second police car roared to life, and the lieutenant nodded at her one last time before driving off, taking Harper away not as an officer, but as a failure. Olivia turned back to her SUV, her gaze now calmer, yet still sharp. She knew this battle wasn't over. Harper would have to face the consequences, and she would make sure of that. But for now, she could exhale a sigh of relief, knowing that the power of truth had triumphed, at least for tonight. The night on the I-40 highway gradually returned to its usual quiet, as the headlights of the second police car carrying James Harper faded into the distance, leaving Olivia Bennett standing alone by the roadside. The red and blue flashing lights from Harper's car were now just a faint glimmer on the horizon, blending into the thick darkness of North Carolina. A cold wind blew through, carrying the crispness of autumn, but Olivia didn't feel cold. Instead, a sense of relief crept into her chest, like finishing a tough mission at Fort Bragg. She stood about 10 feet away from her SUV, still holding her phone, her gaze now no longer sharp as it had been during her confrontation with Harper, but softened, reflecting the peace of someone who knew she had just protected something greater than herself. The lieutenant's car had completely disappeared, taking Harper away not as a confident officer with shiny badge, but as a failure, betrayed by the very system he once relied on. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the cold 40-degree air fill her lungs, soothing the lingering heat from the prolonged confrontation. She slipped her phone back into her blazer pocket, her finger gliding lightly over the screen as a reminder of the power it had just given her. The call to Major General Grayson was not just an act of self-defense. It was a declaration that true power doesn't lie in a badge or a gun, but in the truth and those willing to stand up for it. She walked slowly toward the SUV, her shoes softly crunching on the gravel, a stark contrast to Harper's heavy boots from earlier. She opened the car door, her gaze sweeping over a mess of papers and personal belongings that Harper had rifled through a ballpoint pen rolling under the seat, a small notebook tipped over on the bench, a box of cookies in disarray. She offered a faint smile, not out of anger, but because she could clearly see Harper's desperation in every one of those actions. She settled into the driver's seat, closing the door with a gentle click, and in that moment of quiet, she allowed herself to relax her shoulders, taking a deep breath as if to chase away any lingering tension. Olivia tilted her head, looking through the windshield at the long road ahead. 40 was now peaceful again, no longer filled with the growling radio Harper, no more roaring engines and the support team he had once called. She knew this wasn't over. Harper would have to face Chief Mitchell, an internal investigation, and perhaps even legal consequences that she would make sure he couldn't escape. But tonight, she had won not with fists or aggression, but with determination and a phone call that changed everything. She turned on the radio in the car, and a soft jazz tune filled the quiet space with its soothing melodies. Olivia leaned back in her seat, her gaze no longer focused on Harper or what had just happened, but directed toward the days ahead. She thought about Fort Bragg, about the soldiers under her command, about the lessons she had learned over the years in Iraq and Afghanistan, that strength isn't something you flaunt. It's something you wield when necessary. Harper didn't understand that. He believed power could be imposed with a badge and a loud voice. But Olivia knew it ran deeper. It was about integrity, courage, and the ability to stand firm when everything turns against you. She started the car, the engine purring softly, and slowly steered the SUV back onto the main lane of I-40. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, stretching for miles toward Raleigh, where she would return home after a long day. But her mind wasn't entirely there. She thought about others, those who didn't have a rank like hers, who didn't have Major General Grayson's number saved in their contacts, those who might have been harassed by Harper without any way to fight back. Her phone call wasn't just a shield for herself. It was a beacon of hope for them, a reminder that abuse of power doesn't always win, that the truth can be stronger than any badge. As the SUV glided past mile marker 296, Olivia glanced in the rearview mirror. Behind her, the shoulder was now empty, with no trace of Harper or the confrontation that had just unfolded. But she knew it wasn't truly over. Tomorrow, she would call Major General Grayson, send a detailed report of what had happened, and ensure that Harper faced more than just a reprimand. She would make sure he was held accountable. She wasn't doing this out of hatred. She was doing it for justice, for the values she had sworn to uphold when she donned the uniform of the United States Army. She lightly accelerated, keeping her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes now bright with a new purpose. Harper might think he just lost a small battle on I-40, but Olivia knew better. He had lost to a greater principle, one she would never abandon. The jazz music continued to play, blending with the sound of tires gliding over the pavement. And in that moment, Olivia felt a deep sense of peace, not because of personal victory, but because she knew she had just done the right thing, not just for herself, but for all those who had ever been trampled by people like Harper. The road ahead stretches endlessly, but Olivia isn't in a hurry. She drives with the calmness of someone who's used to facing challenges, who's accustomed to winning through willpower and truth. Tonight, she proved that a phone call can change everything, not because it brings power from the outside, but because it awakens the strength within her, the strength of a woman who will never be defeated. And as the lights of Raleigh slowly come into view in the distance, Olivia knows this is just the beginning, a beginning for justice, for change, and for the battle she will continue to fight with all the determination she carries in her heart. Early in the morning, the I-40 highway was shrouded in a thin layer of fog, like a veil hiding the remnants of the night before. Olivia Bennett drove her sleek black SUV toward Raleigh, about 50 miles from Fort Bragg. Her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes bright and focused. Soft jazz played from the radio, but her mind wasn't completely at ease. Last night, she had defeated James Harper not with fists, but with a phone call to Major General Grayson, which led to him being taken away in disgrace by a lieutenant from the Raleigh Police Department. But Olivia knew one thing from her years on the battlefield. People like Harper don't let go easily. His pride had been crushed, and she could sense that his wounded ego wouldn't let things end here. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 6:45 a.m. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the rows of pines along I-40 in a soft orange hue, but the 45-degree chill of the morning still seeped through the cracks of the window. Olivia wore a light jacket over the outfit from last night, a navy blazer, and a white shirt maintaining the polished appearance of a U.S. Army colonel. Even though she hadn't had time to go home and change, she had decided not to take a different route, not to steer clear of I-40, even though a small part of her warned that Harper might not let it go. But Olivia wasn't someone who lived in fear. She had faced gunfire in Afghanistan, once commanding through nights when no one thought she would make it out alive. A suspended cop wasn't going to change her life. Her gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, a habit from her days in military training. At first, there was nothing noteworthy, just a few cargo trucks and a white sedan about half a mile away. She maintained a steady speed of 65 miles per hour, right at the limit on I-40, her hands gently resting on the steering wheel. But then, the white sedan started to catch her attention. It wasn't keeping a consistent distance like the other vehicles. It was gradually closing in, weaving through a few trucks with an unnatural urgency. Olivia frowned, her eyes narrowing as the car now came within about 1,000 feet of her, moving at an unusual pace in the left lane. She slowed down a bit, down to 60 miles per hour, to observe more closely. The sedan didn't pass her like an ordinary driver. It held its position in her blind spot, just enough to not be clearly seen in the side mirror, but close enough for her to feel its presence. Olivia took a deep breath, the familiar sense of alertness rising in her chest, not fear, but the sharp awareness of someone who had survived countless ambushes. "All right then," she murmured to herself, her voice low and steady, as if she were giving orders to her squad in a moment of crisis. She signaled, pretending to switch to the right lane, her eyes still glued to the rearview mirror. The sedan immediately reacted, gently accelerating to keep pace, but still maintaining a distance in the blind spot. Olivia tilted her head, her gaze now sharper, like a leopard spotting another predator in the darkness. She wasn't sure if it was Harper, but her instincts told her this was no coincidence. She had seen movements like this before, not on the highway, but during patrols in Baghdad. When the enemy tried to follow without revealing their intentions, she kept her hand steady on the wheel, gently accelerating back to 65 miles per hour, waiting to see what the sedan would do next. It was still following her, now only about 500 feet away, closer but still not closing the gap. Olivia felt her heart rate pick up a little, but she didn't let that distract her. She glanced at the clock. 6:50 a.m. The road ahead was thinning out, with only a few trucks scattered miles apart, and I-40 began to narrow into a lonely two-lane stretch, flanked by dense pine trees on either side. This was a perfect spot for an ambush, no witnesses, no easy escape. She knew that, and if that sedan really was Harper, he knew it too. She reached out to turn off the radio, the jazz music fading into silence, leaving a heavy stillness in the car. Olivia leaned in slightly, peering more closely through the rear-view mirror, trying to identify the driver. The sedan was now closer, about 300 feet away, and in the dim light of the early morning, she caught a glimpse of a figure, a man, not in a police uniform, but the way he sat and gripped the steering wheel felt oddly familiar. Her heart raced, but she held it back, keeping her breathing steady. "Harper," she murmured, her voice dropping as if confirming a truth. He no longer had a badge, no longer drove a police car, but his wounded pride had drawn him back not to apologize, but to seek revenge. Olivia tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her eyes now filled not just with vigilance, but with determination. She knew Harper had crossed a line last night, but if he was really in that sedan, he was stepping into a far more dangerous territory, one without the protection of the law, without any safety net. She glanced at the road ahead, calculating the distance to the nearest exit 287, about 5 miles away. She could speed up, could call General Grayson again, but part of the part forged in the heat of battle wanted to confront him, wanted to end this once and for all. The sedan accelerated suddenly, now just 100 feet away from her, and Olivia sensed its intention was not to pass, but to force her off the road. She took a deep breath. Her gaze locked onto the rear-view mirror, and in that moment, she knew that Harper didn't just want revenge, he wanted to destroy her. But Olivia Bennett was not someone easily subdued. She was ready, not to run away, but to fight with her mind, her skills, and a determination that Harper would never comprehend. The faint light of dawn on the I-40 highway was blurred by a thick layer of fog, creating a hazy curtain around Olivia Bennett's sleek black SUV. She kept her hand steady on the wheel, her sharp gaze flicking to the rear-view mirror, tracking the white sedan of James Harper now less than 100 feet behind her, tailing her like a relentless shadow. Its engine roared in the stillness, a menacing sound echoing to the empty stretch of I-40, where dense pine trees on either side obscured any curious eyes. Olivia felt her heart rate quicken, not from fear, but from the alertness of someone who had survived countless ambushes, and she knew all too well that this was no ordinary drive anymore. She glanced at the clock. 6:52 a.m. Exit 287, the nearest exit, was still about 5 miles away, and the road ahead narrowed down to 2 lonely lanes with no trucks or passers-by to bear witness. Harper had chosen this moment, this place, with a calculation no longer based on law but on desperation. Olivia tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as the sedan suddenly accelerated, now just 50 feet away from her, its nose inching into her lane, as if trying to push her off the road. She took a deep breath, keeping her voice calm in her mind. "All right, Harper, if you want to play this game, then let's play." She gently pressed the gas pedal, accelerating to 70 miles per hour, just enough to widen the gap, but not enough to turn it into an obvious chase. The sedan immediately followed, its engine roaring louder, and through the rear-view mirror, Olivia caught a glimpse of Harper's face no longer in his police uniform, no badge in sight, just a pair of furious, bloodshot eyes and a tight grip on the steering wheel. He was no longer an officer. He was a wounded man, having lost everything after last night, and now he wanted to reclaim it by dragging her down with him. Olivia leaned slightly, her gaze sweeping over the road ahead, weighing every possibility. She could call 911. She could reach out to General Grayson again, but a part of her, the part forged in the heat of battle, wanted to handle this herself. She had given Harper a chance last night, had warned him, and he had chosen this path. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her eyes now filled not just with vigilance, but with determination. "You want to fight?" she murmured, her voice dropping like a vowel. "I'll show you what fighting really means." The sedan suddenly accelerated, racing up alongside her, just a few feet away in the left lane. Olivia glanced over, and in that brief moment, her eyes locked with Harper's through the car window. He no longer had the smugness of a police officer. Instead, he wore the madness of a man who had lost everything: his job, his honor, his power. He leaned in, shouting something to the window, but the sound of the wind and the engine drowned out his words. Olivia didn't need to hear him. She knew what he wanted. Revenge, not just for last night, but because she had dared to stand up to him, daring to make him a failure. Harper gripped the wheel, the sedan veering sharply to the right, trying to force Olivia's SUV onto the shoulder. She reacted instantly, gently tapping the brakes to avoid a collision while keeping control. The tires screeched against the pavement, producing a deafening sound, and the SUV swayed slightly before she steadied it. "Not that easy," she growled, her gaze locked on the road ahead. She accelerated back up to 75 miles per hour, stretching the distance once more, but Harper wasn't backing down. He stayed right on her tail, the sedan now just 20 feet behind her, the front end inching into her lane, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment. Olivia felt her heart pounding harder, but she wasn't panicking. She had driven through mine-laden roads in Iraq, escaped chases that no one thought she could survive. Harper didn't know that. He thought she was just a woman driving alone, easily intimidated by his aggression. But Olivia wasn't prey, she was a survivor, a warrior, and she wouldn't let him win. She glanced at the rear-view mirror, seeing the sedan charging up again, now just 10 feet away, close enough that she could hear the engine roaring through the glass. She pressed the gas harder, the SUV surging at 80 miles per hour, but Harper wasn't backing down. He barreled after her, the sedan shaking from the speed, and in a moment of madness, he jerked the wheel again, trying to force her onto the shoulder more aggressively. Olivia leaned in, her eyes now blazing with absolute focus. She slammed on the brakes suddenly, letting the sedan zoom past before she yanked the wheel to the left, dodging Harper's push. The tires screeched against the pavement, smoke billowing from the friction, and the sedan wobbled as Harper lost control for a split second, nearly crashing into the roadside barrier. Olivia gripped the steering wheel. Her gaze locked onto the sedan as Harper steadied his car, turning to look at her through the rear-view mirror with a glare full of hatred. He didn't stop, he accelerated again, barreling toward her with a wildness that was completely out of control. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling adrenaline surge through her body, but she didn't let it cloud her mind. She knew Harper had crossed the line. There were no laws left, no reason, just blind revenge. And she also knew she had to put an end to this, not by running away, but by facing it head-on. The road ahead stretched out, but exit 287 was now just 3 miles away. Olivia tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Her gaze now filled not just with determination, but with a readiness for a battle that Harper could never anticipate. He wanted to destroy her, but Olivia Bennett was not someone to be easily defeated. She was prepared, and she would make Harper understand that he had chosen the wrong opponent. Once again, the fog on the I-40 highway gradually lifted under the early morning sun, revealing a lonely two-lane road stretching between the dense pines of North Carolina. Olivia Bennett tightened her grip on the steering wheel of her sleek black SUV, her eyes shining with absolute focus as James Harper's white sedan barreled toward her, less than 10 feet away. The roar of his engine thundered like a living threat, drowning out every other sound in the stillness. Harper had crossed every line, no badge. No laws, just the madness of a man determined to destroy her at any cost. But Olivia wasn't a victim. She was a warrior, and this was a battle she refused to lose. She glanced at the clock. 6:55 a.m. Exit 287, the nearest off-ramp, was just 3 miles away, but the road ahead was now empty, with no other cars in sight except for the two of them. Harper swerved the wheel again, the sedan lunging to the right with aggressive speed, trying to force Olivia's SUV onto the shoulder. Her tires screeched against the pavement, smoke rising from the friction as she lightly hit the brakes, keeping a firm grip on the wheel to avoid a collision. "Not that easy," she growled, her voice dropping to a vowel in her mind. She accelerated again, hitting 80 miles per hour, stretching the distance a bit, but Harper wasn't giving up. He chased after her, the sedan vibrating with speed, its nose inching into her lane like a hungry predator. Olivia felt adrenaline surging through her body, but she didn't let it cloud her mind. She had driven through mine-laden roads in Iraq, escaped chases that no one thought she could survive. Harper didn't know that. He thought she was just a woman who could be easily subdued, but she was Colonel Olivia Bennett, forged in the heat of battle and sleepless nights. She glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw Harper leaning out the window, his face twisted in rage, shouting something that the wind drowned out. She didn't need to hear him. His eyes said it all. He wanted her dead, not just for revenge, but to erase the humiliation she had inflicted on him the night before. The sedan lunged forward again, now just 5 feet away from her, and Harper jerked the wheel harder, trying to force her into the metal fence by the roadside. Olivia reacted instantly, swerving left, the SUV swaying a bit before she steadied it. The tires screeched against the pavement, producing a deafening sound, and she felt a light jolt as Harper's rear bumper scraped against hers. "Crazy," she muttered, her eyes now blazing with determination. She slammed on the gas, the SUV shooting up to 85 miles per hour, but Harper wasn't backing down. He charged after her, the sedan now shaking violently, as if it were roaring along with his madness. She glanced at the road ahead, a gentle curve appearing about half a mile away, where I-40 bent to the right between two towering rows of pine trees. Olivia tilted her head, quickly calculating in her mind. She could use that curve to escape Harper or to confront him head-on, and she chose to confront him. She suddenly slowed down to 70 miles per hour, pretending to lose control, allowing Harper's sedan to pull up alongside her once again. He leaned over, shouting to the window, "You can't get away!" His voice was hoarse and filled with hatred. And in that moment, Olivia clearly saw the madness in his eyes, no longer rational. Just a man ready to do anything to regain the little power he had lost. Harper jerked the wheel again, the sedan barreling straight into the side of Olivia's SUV, this time with a clear intention to push her off the road. She felt the powerful impact, the SUV shaking. But she held the wheel steady, gritting her teeth to stay in control. "All right then," she growled, her eyes locked on the turn ahead. She slammed on the brakes suddenly, letting the sedan pass before she yanked the wheel to the right, maneuvering around Harper's left with precision of someone who had once driven military vehicles through narrow alleys in Baghdad. The tires screeched against the pavement, thick smoke billowing up, and Harper's sedan wobbled as he lost his target, nearly crashing into the fence. But Harper didn't stop. He steadied the car, spun around, and charged at her again, the sedan now shaking violently, as if it were screaming in sync with his desperation. Olivia glanced in the rearview mirror and saw he was only 10 feet behind her, and in that moment, she realized this was no longer a chase. It was a fight for survival. She pressed the gas harder, the SUV shooting up to 90 miles per hour, taking the turn with a speed Harper hadn't anticipated. She leaned into the turn, gripping the wheel tightly, feeling the centrifugal force pressing against her body as the car hugged the curve, the tires screeching against the pavement with a deafening roar. Harper chased after her, but he didn't have Olivia's skills. The sedan swerved as it took the turn, tires skidding out, and he shouted something as he lost control. Olivia glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the sedan spin around and crash into the metal guardrail with a deafening bang. Smoke billowed from the hood, and in that moment, she saw Harper pounding his hands on the steering wheel, his face twisted in pain and rage. But he didn't stop. He flung the car door open, stepped out of the wrecked sedan, hands trembling but his eyes still burning with hatred. Olivia slowed down, stopping the SUV about 50 feet away. Her gaze locked onto Harper through the windshield. He stood there, swaying on the empty road. No cars in sight, no badge left, just a failure consumed by blind revenge. She took a deep breath, her eyes now reflecting not just determination, but a readiness for the next step. Harper had crossed a line, and now she would make him pay not with aggression, but with a strength he could never comprehend. If you feel your heart racing as Olivia turns her enemy into a failure with an unwavering determination like no other, be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Legendary Narratives channel right now. Stay tuned so you don't miss out on these inspiring moments of righteous victory. The morning sun on the I-40 highway now shone brighter, cutting to the thin fog, illuminating the chaotic scene that had just unfolded. James Harper's white sedan lay tilted on the shoulder. It had crumpled after crashing into the metal barrier, white smoke rising from the engine like a declaration of defeat. Olivia Bennett sat in her sleek black SUV, about 50 feet away, her hands still gripping the steering wheel, her gaze locked onto Harper through the windshield. He stood unsteadily on the empty road, his hands trembling, his face twisted in pain and rage after the botched crash. Yet his eyes burned with hatred, like a flame refusing to die out even as everything around him had crumbled. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling her heartbeat slow down after the wild chase. The engine of the SUV still rumbled softly, but the space was now eerily quiet, filled only with the sound of the wind whistling through the pines and Harper's heavy breathing not far away. She glanced at her watch. 6:58 a.m. Exit 287, the nearest exit, was less than 3 miles away, but she wasn't in a hurry to leave. Harper had crossed the line, turning last night's confrontation into a fight for survival, and now she knew she had to end this not by running away, but by facing it head-on, just like she always did. She slowly opened the car door and stepped out with the calmness of a commander who has just emerged from battle. Her shoes touched the gravel with a soft sound, a stark contrast to the heavy boots of Harper from a night before. She stood tall at 5 feet 8 inches, broad-shouldered and steady, her gaze fixed on Harper as he staggered closer, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you've won?" Harper shouted, his voice hoarse and filled with rage. You think you can destroy me and just walk away? He stepped forward, about 30 feet away from her, each heavy footfall dragging the weight of his own defeat. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her gaze now reflecting not just determination, but the calmness of someone who knows they hold the truth. "I'm not destroying you," she said, her voice low and steady, echoing in the silence. "You're destroying yourself by choosing this path. I gave you a chance last night to stop, but you wouldn't." Harper paused, about 20 feet away from her, his bloodshot eyes flashing with an uncontrollable anger. "A chance," he growled, his voice trembling with rage. "You called someone from the Pentagon to crush me. You took everything, my job, my honor, everything. And now you dare to stand here and spout that hypocritical nonsense." Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the 45-degree chill seep through her blazer. She didn't respond right away, letting Harper's words drift by like the wind rustling to the pine trees, meaningless and hollow. "You lost everything because you abused your power," she finally spoke, her voice carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "Not because of me, but because you chose to bully others instead of doing your job right. I was just protecting myself, and now I will protect others from you." Harper let out a harsh laugh, the sound echoing in the empty space, but it couldn't hide the desperation in his eyes. "Do you think you're so noble?" he shouted, stepping closer, now just 15 feet between them. "You think you can stand here, say those words, and everything will be fine? I won't let you win." He lunged forward, his hands raised as if to attack, but his steps were unsteady, his body weakened from the car crash. Olivia didn't back down. She stood firm, her gaze as cold as ice, waiting. She had been trained for situations like this, having faced enemies far more dangerous than Harper 100 times over. He was no threat. He was just a failure flailing in desperation. Harper stopped about 10 feet away from her, his breath heavy, hands trembling as he raised them. "You will pay," he growled, his voice now sounded more like a plea than a threat. "You have no idea what I've lost in 15 years as a cop, all gone because of you." Olivia tilted her head, her gaze now not just calm but tinged with a hint of pity, not for Harper, but for his blindness. 15 years, she repeated, her tone soft yet sharp as a knife. "And in those 15 years, what have you done? Bully the innocent? Use your badge to push others around? If you've lost everything, then that's the price you have to pay, not because of me, but because of you." Harper stood still, his breath coming out in thick white puffs in the cold air. He wanted to charge at her, wanted to hit her, wanted to do anything to regain the little power he had lost, but his body was too weak. He swayed, one hand braced against his knee, his eyes now clouded with pain and defeat. Olivia stood firm, watching him without a hint of fear. She knew he was no longer capable of doing anything. The chase was over, and he had lost, not just physically, but in every way possible. She turned around, slowly walking toward the SUV, her gaze now fixed on the road ahead. "You should stop while you still can," she said, her voice ringing out in the stillness, calm yet carrying a hint of final warning. "But you can't do that, and now you'll have to face the consequences." Harper looked up, his eyes flashing with one last glimmer of hatred, but he said nothing. He just stood there, swaying on the empty road, like a ghost of himself, no car, no strength, nothing left but failure. Olivia opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, her gaze now more at peace. She knew Harper had crossed a line, and she had defeated him not with aggression, but with resilience and skills he would never comprehend. She started the engine, the soft roar of the motor filling the air, and slowly drove away, leaving Harper standing there, alone in the empty street, with his hatred now meaningless. The morning sunlight on I-40 now blazed brightly, dispersing the thin mist and revealing the Tulane road stretching between the deep green pines of North Carolina. Olivia Bennett drove her sleek black SUV toward Raleigh, about a mile from the scene of her confrontation with James Harper. The engine purred steadily, like a calming rhythm after the storm had passed. She glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Harper's figure fade away. He still stood there, swaying by the roadside next to his broken sedan, a complete failure, with no car, no strength, and nothing left but a bitterness that could no longer change anything. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the 45-degree chill of the morning seeping to the window crack. But inside, she felt warm not because of personal victory, but because she knew she had just protected something much greater. She turned the radio back on, and soft jazz filled the quiet space of the car with soothing melodies. She leaned back in her seat, her gaze no longer sharp like it had been during her confrontation with Harper, but softened, reflecting the peace of someone who had just overcome a challenge with will and truth. She glanced at the clock. 7:02 a.m. Exit 287, the nearest exit, was less than 2 miles away, and Raleigh was getting closer with every turn of the wheels. She thought of Harper not with anger or disdain, but with a hint of distant pity. He had it all. 15 years as a cop, a badge that once brought him power, a life he could be proud of, but he threw it all away, not because of her, but because of his own arrogance and abuse of power. She recalled the look in his eyes when he charged at her, his hands trembling, his voice hoarse and filled with hatred. It wasn't the gaze of an officer, but that of a man who had lost himself. Olivia tilted her head, her gaze now fixed on the road ahead, and she wondered what had driven Harper so far. Was it a bruised ego, the shame from last night, or was it a blindness he could never recognize? She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, feeling its solidness beneath her hands. She knew the answer didn't matter. Harper had chosen his path, and she had done what was necessary to stop him. She wasn't proud of having beaten him. She was proud of having stood her ground, of having protected not just herself, but also the values she had sworn to uphold when she joined the United States Army. She thought about the long nights in Afghanistan, when the sound of bombs echoed in the sky, and she had to keep her squad alive. Harper didn't understand that he didn't grasp that true strength doesn't lie in crushing others, but in rising up when everything turns against you. The road ahead stretched out, and Olivia gently accelerated to 70 miles per hour, keeping a steady grip on the wheel. She thought about the others, those without ranks like hers, those who didn't have the skills to drive through chases, those who didn't have Major General Grayson's number saved in their contacts. Harper might have harassed them, might have made them bow their heads in fear, and that thought made her grip tighten even more. She wasn't just fighting for herself this morning. She was fighting for them, for those who had no voice, no power to resist. And she knew that this battle, even though it had ended with Harper on I-40, would continue in the days to come. She glanced at the phone resting on the passenger seat, the screen still lit up with the last call to General Grayson from the night before. She would call him back, reporting in detail about what had just happened, not to brag, but to ensure that Harper couldn't escape the consequences. She would send the footage from her dash cam, capturing the entire wild chase, and she would do whatever it took to make sure he was punished not just for her, but for justice. She took a deep breath, her eyes now shining with new purpose. Harper might think he had only lost a small battle, but Olivia knew he had lost to a greater principle, a principle she would never abandon. The sound of jazz music continued to play, blended with the sound of tires gliding over the pavement, and Olivia felt a deep sense of peace settling in her heart. She didn't need to rush. She drove with the calmness of someone who was used to facing challenges, who had learned to triumph through willpower and truth. Harper had crossed a line, and she had made him pay not with aggression, but with resilience and skills he would never comprehend. She took one last glance in the rearview mirror, seeing the road behind her now empty, with no trace of Harper or his broken sedan. The lights of exit 287 gradually appeared in the distance, and Olivia turned on her blinker, preparing to exit off I-40. She knew today wouldn't be easy. There would be reports, there would be questions, there would be calls from Fort Bragg and the Raleigh Police Department. But she was ready. She had made it through last night, survived this morning, and she would keep moving forward, not for fame or victory, but because she believed in what she was doing. Harper may have lost, but Olivia wasn't fighting to defeat him. She was fighting to protect what was right, and that was a strength no one could take away from her. She turned onto the exit, her gaze now fixed on Raleigh, where she would return home, wash up, and prepare for a new day. But inside her, a fire still burned, not the fire of vengeance, but a determination of the belief that the truth always prevails, no matter how strong the opponent may be. Harper had chosen the wrong person to confront, and now he would have to live with the consequences, while Olivia pressed on, unyielding and resolute, just as she always had. The morning sunlight now blazed on the I-40 highway, casting a warm golden layer over the road as Olivia Bennett drove her sleek black SUV, taking exit 287, leaving behind the scene of her confrontation with James Harper. The sound of tires gliding over the pavement echoed steadily, blending with the soft jazz playing on the radio, creating a peaceful rhythm after the storm that had just passed. She glanced in the rearview mirror one last time at the empty road behind her, with no trace of Harper or his broken sedan. Just the quiet of a typical North Carolina morning. But Olivia knew that what had just happened was not the end. It was a beginning, a reminder of the power of resilience and truth. She slowed down to 40 miles per hour as she entered the road leading to Raleigh, her eyes now bright with deep sense of peace. Harper had crossed the line, trying to destroy her with the madness of a failure, but he didn't understand that she was not just a woman behind the wheel. She was Colonel Olivia Bennett, forged in the battlefield, through long nights when no one thought she could survive. He had lost, not because she was physically stronger, but because she was stronger in will, in her belief in what was right. She took a deep breath, feeling the 45-degree chill gradually fade away under the warm sunlight. She thought about the others, those who didn't have the chance to confront Harper like she did, those who might have been harassed by him without the ability to fight back. This battle wasn't just hers. It was theirs, and she would make sure that Harper would never have the opportunity to hurt anyone again. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her gaze now focused ahead, where Raleigh awaited her with a new day, a day in which she would continue to fight, not out of hatred, but for justice. As the SUV glided past the Welcome to Raleigh sign, Olivia offered a faint smile, not out of triumph, but because she knew she had done what needed to be done. Harper might think he had just lost a small battle on I-40, but he had lost to a much greater principled one that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She turned off the radio, letting silence envelop her, and in that moment, she felt her true strength, not in badges or power, but in the courage to stand up, to fight, and to win with the truth. The midday sunlight streamed to the large window of the office at Fort Bragg, casting a warm golden glow over Olivia Bennett's desk. She sat there, dressed in her neatly pressed U.S. Army uniform, the shiny colonel's insignia gleaming on her shoulder, her hands lightly resting on a stack of paperwork detailing what had happened on the I-40 highway last night and this morning. The steady tapping of keys echoed as she finalized the last draft, her eyes bright and focused, not from fatigue after a long night, but from the determination of someone who knows that justice doesn't just stop at personal victory. It must be pursued to the very end. She glanced at the wall clock, 12:15 p.m. Just a few hours earlier, she had left I-40, leaving James Harper swaying by the roadside next to his broken-down sedan, a complete failure after the wild chase. But Olivia wouldn't let herself get lost in relief or complacency. She knew Harper wasn't just a threat to her. He was a symbol of the system that sometimes shelters the abusers, and she wouldn't let him escape with just a car crash and a few threats. She had driven straight from Raleigh to Fort Bragg, showered, changed into her uniform, and sat down at her desk with a single goal: to make sure Harper paid, not just for her, but for all the others he might have trampled on. She opened her laptop and checked her email from Major General Grayson. It was a brief but authoritative message. Colonel Bennett, I have received your preliminary report. I am coordinating with the Raleigh Police Department and the Wake County Court. Send me all the details and the dashcam footage as soon as possible. We will handle this thoroughly. Olivia gave a faint smile, not out of triumph, but because she knew Grayson wasn't one to make empty promises. He had witnessed her face the toughest challenges over the past 15 years, and he understood that when she called for justice, it wasn't personal, it was a matter of principle. She plugged the memory card from the dashcam into her laptop, and the video began to play, frame by frame, capturing the confrontation from last night on I-40. It started with Harper stopping her car for no reason, illegally searching her, and then the chase this morning when he tried to force her off the road and rammed his car into the barrier. The roar of the engine, the screeching of tires against the pavement, and Harper's frantic screams echoed to the laptop's small speakers, like an undeniable living indictment. Olivia tilted her head, her gaze now not just focused but resolute, the look of someone who knows that this evidence will be the final blow against Harper. She attached the video to the email, along with a detailed report outlining every minute, every action, and every word spoken by Harper, recorded with the precision of a military officer. She wrote succinctly in the body of the email, Dear Brigadier General, this is a complete account regarding James Harper, former officer of the Raleigh Police Department. His actions not only violate the law, but also threaten my life, and potentially the lives of many others in the past. I recommend prosecuting him for assault, willful endangerment, and abuse of power. Please await further instructions. She hit send, her eyes now shining with a clear purpose. Justice must be served. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the training field of Fort Bragg, where soldiers were jogging under the bright 75-degree F midday sun. She thought about Harper, not with anger, but with a hint of distant reflection. He had the chance to stop, the chance to hold on to whatever honor was left, but he chose the path of revenge, and now he would have to face the consequences. She recalled the look in his eyes as he stood by the roadside, his hands trembling, his face twisted with hatred that was not the gaze of a strong man, but of someone who had lost everything because of his own blindness. The phone rang, cutting through her train of thought. Olivia turned back, picking up the receiver with her usual calm. "Colonel Bennett here," she said, her voice deep and steady. General Grayson's voice came through the line, sharp and unyielding. "Colonel, I just watched the video. It's crystal clear that Harper not only crossed the line, but committed a serious offense. I've spoken with Chief Mitchell in Raleigh. They're launching an internal investigation, but with this evidence, he's headed for court. Do you want to be directly involved?" Olivia took a deep breath, her eyes now shining with unwavering determination. "Yes, sir," she replied. "I want to make sure this is handled the right way, not just for me, but for the others who may have been harassed by him." Grayson let out a soft chuckle, a rare sound from the stern man. "I know," he said. "Just get ready. The Wake County Court will be calling a hearing soon. With this evidence, Harper doesn't stand a chance." She nodded, even though Grayson couldn't see it through the phone. "Thank you, General," she said, her voice ringing with sincerity. She set the phone down, her gaze now fixed on the stack of papers on the table. She knew the trial wouldn't be easy. Harper might find ways to justify himself. There could be people who once protected him stepping up to defend him, but she wasn't afraid. She had survived the night on I-40, made it through the chase this morning, and she would walk into the courtroom with the same determination she had carried her whole life. She sat down once more, her gaze now calmer, yet still sharp. Harper had crumbled not only on that deserted road, but within his own arrogance. And now, she would make sure that justice was served, not through revenge, but through the power of truth, the strength she had used to defeat him, and would continue to use to protect what is right. The clock ticked steadily, and Olivia knew that time was on her side, the side of justice, the side of those who never back down. The afternoon sunlight faded to the large windows of the Wake County Courthouse in Raleigh, casting a warm glow on the polished wooden benches where Olivia Bennett sat, dressed in her U.S. Army uniform, her hands resting lightly on her thighs. It had been a week since the wild chase on I-40, and now she was at the preliminary hearing for James Harper, not as a victim, but as the key witness, determined to ensure that justice was served. The courtroom was silent, broken only by the rustle of papers and the soft whispers of a few spectators in the back. Olivia glanced at the wall clock. It was 3:45 p.m. She knew this moment was a culmination of everything she had fought for, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been trampled by Harper. Harper sat at the defendant's table, no longer wearing the police uniform that once gave him power, but instead dressed in a wrinkled gray suit. His bloodshot eyes were now clouded with exhaustion and fear. He didn't look at Olivia. He hung his head, his hands clenched tightly on the table, like a man who knew there was no turning back. The judge, an older man with a stern face, rapped his gavel on the desk, his voice deep and authoritative. The preliminary hearing for James Harper, charged with assault, reckless endangerment by means, and abuse of power under the color of law, will now begin. Prosecutor, please present your case. The prosecutor, a young woman with sharp eyes, stood up, holding a stack of papers and a USB drive containing video footage from Olivia's dash cam. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "we have undeniable evidence that the defendant, James Harper, intentionally assaulted Colonel Olivia Bennett, a senior officer of the United States Army, on the I-40 highway on the morning of March 24th, 2025. This video captures the entire criminal act, from his illegal stop, unlawful search, to the reckless chase with the intent to cause harm or worse. She plugged the USB drive into the projector, and a large screen in the courtroom lit up with frame after frame from the dash cam. The roar of the engine echoed through the speakers, and the courtroom fell silent as the video played, showing Harper forcing Olivia's SUV to the side of the road, him barreling around a corner at 90 miles per hour, and his sedan crashing into a metal fence. Harper's frantic scream rang out, "You can't escape," a wordless confession of his intentions. Olivia sat still, her gaze locked on the screen, not because she needed to see again, but because she wanted to make sure everyone in this room understood who Harper really was. Not a duty-bound officer, but an abuser of power who had crossed every line. The prosecutor turned off the projector and looked back at the judge. "Your Honor," she continued, "this isn't Harper's first offense. We've uncovered a string of complaints over the past 15 years, ranging from harassment and excessive use of force to discrimination, all of which have been covered up or ignored by the Raleigh Police Department. But this time, he picked the wrong person to mess with. Colonel Bennett not only survived, but he also provided irrefutable evidence to bring him to light." Harper looked up, his eyes flashing with one last spark of anger, but he said nothing. He knew he had run out of chances. The judge struck the gavel again, his gaze shifting to Olivia. "Colonel Bennett," he said, his voice deep and respectful, "do you wish to say anything before the court?" Olivia rose, her posture straight and strong, her eyes shining with unwavering determination. She stepped up to the witness stand, her voice ringing clear in the courtroom. "Your Honor, I am not here out of personal hatred. I am here for justice. James Harper has abused his power, not just against me, but potentially against many others who lack a voice to fight back. I survived the night on I-40 and the chase that morning, but not everyone is as fortunate as I am. I urge the court to hold him accountable, not for revenge, but to protect others from people like him." The courtroom was silent, with only Olivia's steady breathing as she returned to her seat. The judge looked at Harper, his gaze now as cold as ice. "Mr. Harper," he said, his voice ringing out like a sentence, "do you have anything to say?" Harper stood up, his hands trembling, his voice hoarse. I was just doing my job. She defied me. She ruined me. I never meant to kill anyone. I just wanted her to pay." But his words were weak, hollow, and the entire courtroom could see the desperation in them. The judge struck the gavel one last time, his voice resonating with certainty. "Based on the evidence and testimonies, the court finds sufficient grounds to charge James Harper with the stated offenses. He will be held in custody until the official trial. This hearing is adjourned." The sound of the gavel echoed like a final hammer blow, and two court officers stepped forward, handcuffing Harper and leading him out of the room. He cast one last glance at Olivia, his eyes now devoid of hatred, replaced instead by the complete defeat of a man who once believed he was invincible, now betrayed by the very system he relied on. Olivia stood up and walked out courtroom, the afternoon sun draping over her shoulders like a gentle halo. She took a deep breath, feeling the warm 70-degree F air of the Raleigh afternoon, and within her, a profound sense of relief spread, not because Harper had lost, but because justice had prevailed. She knew he would face a sentence of up to 15 years in prison, maybe more, but more importantly, he would never have the chance to hurt anyone again. She approached the SUV, her eyes now bright with an unwavering belief. The truth always triumphs over abuse of power, and she had proven that, not just for herself, but for all those who had ever been forgotten. She opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and as the engine purred to life, Olivia knew this was the end of a chapter where Harper had completely crumbled, and she had risen, unyielding and steadfast, just as she always did. The fiery red sunset blanketed Fort Bragg, casting a warm orange hue over the concrete buildings and training fields as Olivia Bennett stepped out of her office, dressed in her U.S. Army uniform, the gleaming colonel's insignia shone on her shoulder, her hands relaxed at her sides, yet her posture remained straight and strong as always. It had been a week since the preliminary hearing at the Wake County Court, where James Harper had been handcuffed and led away, his face twisted in defeat after the footage from her dash cam exposed all his wrongdoings. Olivia glanced at her watch 6:30 p.m. She had just wrapped up a long day at the base, but her mind wasn't heavy. It felt light, like the sky after a rain shower, because she knew she had done the right thing. She walked slowly across the training field, her gaze sweeping over the young soldiers jogging in the fading light, the sound of their shoes hitting the ground echoing like a steady drumbeat. She paused, standing still in the shade of a large oak tree, taking a deep breath to feel the cool 65-degree breeze of a North Carolina evening. She thought about Harper, not with anger or disdain, but with a hint of distant contemplation. He had completely crumbled, not just on I-40 or in the courtroom, but in his very own arrogance. She recalled the look in his eyes as he was led away, his hands trembling in cuffs, his hoarse voice pleading for sympathy he never deserved. But Olivia wasn't here to judge him. She was here to defend what was right, and she had done just that. She turned around and walked toward the sleek black SUV parked near the main gate of Fort Bragg. As she opened the car door, she glanced at the phone on the passenger seat, its screen lighting up with a message from Major General Grayson. "Colonel, Harper's official trial is set for next week. With your evidence, he has no way out. Take a break. You deserve it." Olivia gave a faint smile, not out of triumph, but because she knew Grayson understood she wasn't doing this for glory or personal victory. She settled into the driver's seat, started the engine, the soft rumble of the motor filling the air, and slowly drove out of base, heading toward Raleigh, 50 miles away. The road grew darker as she moved away from the light of Fort Bragg, but her mind was clear with thoughts of the journey she had just taken. She thought about the night on I-40 when Harper had pulled her over for no reason, searched her car illegally, and threatened her with the smugness of someone who believed they were invincible. She thought about the next morning when he barreled his car toward her with the intent to kill, his face twisted with hatred as the sedan crashed into the barrier. And she thought about the hearing, when the truth from the video had crushed him, leaving him with nothing but failure. But more than anything, she thought about the others, those who didn't have ranks like hers, who lacked the skills to escape Harper, who didn't have a voice to demand justice. She gently accelerated to 65 miles per hour on the highway, her gaze now fixed ahead, where the lights of Raleigh slowly emerged on the horizon. She wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting for them, for those who had been trampled by abuse of power, for those who had bowed their heads in fear because no one stood up for them. Harper could be a villain, but he wasn't the only one. He was a symbol of a system that sometimes protected the wrong people, and Olivia knew that her victory wasn't just about his downfall. It was a glimmer of hope for those who had been forgotten. She turned on the radio, and a gentle piano melody filled the quiet space in the car with soothing notes. She leaned back in her seat, her gaze now reflecting not just peace, but profound belief that determination and righteousness always have the power to overcome any challenge. She recalled her days in Iraq, standing on the edge of life and death, where every decision was a gamble with the lives of dozens of soldiers. Harper didn't understand that. He didn't grasp that true strength doesn't lie in badges or power, but in the ability to stand firm when everything falls apart, and the courage to face injustice no matter what the cost may be. She slowed down as she approached Raleigh, the city lights now shining brightly ahead. She knew Harper's official trial would be the final challenge. He might try to justify himself, perhaps find a way to shift the blame, but she wasn't worried. She had the truth, she had evidence, and she had a determination that Harper could never overcome. She turned onto the road leading home, her eyes now bright with a message she carried in her heart. Justice isn't something you hope for. It's something you fight to achieve, and she had done just that, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in what was right. Night fell over Raleigh as Olivia Bennett drove her sleek black SUV into her garage, the streetlights casting soft yellow streaks on the windshield. She turned off the engine, the gentle rumble fading away, giving way to the stillness of a peaceful evening. Stepping out of the vehicle, her combat boots thudded against the concrete floor, and she took a deep breath, savoring the cool 60-degree air of North Carolina. Her gaze swept over the small house she returned to after long days at Fort Bragg, after battles fought on the battlefield and on I-40. And in that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace, not because everything was over, but because she knew she had fulfilled her duty. She walked into the house, placing her keys on the kitchen table, the soft light from the ceiling fixture illuminating the crisp uniform she wore. She thought about James Harper, not with anger or regret, but with a firm belief that he would never have the chance to hurt anyone again. The official trial next week will be the end for him. With the dash cam footage, her testimony, and a slew of past complaints being unearthed, Harper would have to pay the price, possibly 15 years in prison or more. But for Olivia, victory wasn't about the sentence. It was about the message she was sending. That determination and righteousness always have the power to overcome abuse, no matter how strong the enemy may be. She walked over to the living room window, gazing out at the quiet street of Raleigh, where the streetlights flickered like tiny stars against the darkness. She recalled the night on I-40, when Harper had pulled her over with the smugness of someone who thought they were invincible. She remembered the phone call to General Grayson, his voice resonating like a promise that justice would be served. And she remembered the chase the next morning, when Harper barreled toward her with murderous intent, only to crumble in abject failure. But more than anything, she remembered the feeling of standing in the courtroom, as the truth from the video crushed him. As his gaze shifted from hatred to despair, that was a moment she knew she hadn't just won for herself, but for everyone who had ever been forgotten. She sat down in the armchair, her gaze now softened, reflecting the peace of someone who has overcome challenges with willpower and truth. She thought about the soldiers at Fort Bragg, the young men and women she trained, who looked up to her as a beacon of courage and discipline. She wasn't fighting just to defeat Harper. She was fighting to inspire, to show them that justice isn't something you wait for, but something you stand up and demand, no matter what the cost. Harper may have lost, but his legacy as abuse of power, his arrogance would not disappear easily, and Olivia knew she would continue to fight, not just on I-40 or in the courtroom, but in every moment that injustice still existed. She stood up and walked to her desk, where a letter from the Army Command was waiting for her, a formal commendation from Major General Grayson, praising her steadfastness and professionalism in the matter with Harper. She smiled faintly, not out of pride, but because she knew it wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who believed in what was right. She set the letter down, her eyes now shining with an unwavering faith. True strength doesn't lie in power or weapons, but in the determination to stand up when everything falls apart, in the righteousness to protect what is valuable, no matter how tough the road may be. She stepped out onto the balcony, gazing up at the night sky sprinkled with tiny, twinkling stars. She thought about those who had no voice, those who had been tormented by Harper, who had bowed their heads in fear. And in her heart, a fire still burned, not of vengeance, but of hope. She had given them a glimmer of light, a promise that injustice was not their fate, that someone would rise up, would fight, would triumph. Harper had crumbled, but Olivia's message would live on, not in words, but in actions, in the resilience she carried with her for a lifetime. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and in that moment, she knew she was not just a colonel, not just a survivor. She was a symbol of resilience and righteousness, a flame that would never be extinguished in the darkness. She turned back into the house, closing the balcony door, her eyes now shining bright with an unwavering purpose. To keep moving forward, to keep fighting, not for glory or victory, but because she believed that the truth was always stronger, and she would be the one to bring it to the world. As the lights in the house slowly dimmed, Olivia Bennett stood there, unyielding and resolute, just as she always had, a woman who transformed challenges into hope and turned righteousness into everlasting strength. Thank you for joining us on the inspiring journey of Olivia Bennett, a woman who used her determination and truth to stand up against abuse of power, bringing justice not just for herself but for all of us. If you're moved by her strength, show some love and hit that subscribe button on Legendary Narratives so you don't miss out on more inspiring stories like this one. From I-40 to the courtroom, Olivia has shown us that righteousness never backs down, a valuable lesson for us to live stronger every day. You all are amazing, always supporting Legendary Narratives with your love and passion. See you in the next video. Stay tough, stay proud, and see you soon.